Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome to the Half Hour Podcast. I'm Brian, the creator of Half Hour. My goal here is simple, to add real value to your day, to help you learn, to help you lead, and to help you level up in your leadership journey, whether it's a new perspective, a real-world example, or something you can put into practice right away. To check out my past episodes, go to itshalfhour.blog/podcast. Sometimes the tension in a room doesn't mean something's wrong. It means that something real is finally being said. You can feel it, right? The air tightens a little, voices are on edge, and suddenly everyone's waiting for someone, maybe you, to smooth it over. But here's the thing. What if the goal isn't to calm it down, but just to hold it steady? Because not every disagreement is destructive. Some are the very thing that pushes the work forward. Today we're talking about how to design the right kind of disagreement, how to make space for conflict that sharpens ideas instead of breaking people. And if you've ever walked out of a meeting thinking, why did we all just agree to something nobody actually wanted? Stick around and I hope you enjoy. Welcome back everyone to another episode. So we're going to be talking about, how teams can have disagreements and even get into pretty heated ones sometimes, and how sometimes that is healthy, healthier than just smoothing things over all the time and just kind of towing the line and doing the status quo, because sometimes that is the most unhealthy thing and the thing that the group doesn't need. And disagreement is good. I know that in this age of social media, we've had this experience where everything is curated to our likes and dislikes and preferences, and in my opinion has created a lot of issues with people being able to disagree with each other, and we've seen it on the whole spectrum. And it's definitely come into our production teams. And not to say that disagreement has never been there, but I'm just saying that with where we are in the world today, I feel like it's a little bit more prevalent, and maybe people are having a harder time to disagree and kind of get into a fight about something that they really care about. And sometimes that's okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is the myth of harmony. And we think harmony means that the team is healthy, but sometimes it's just everyone kind of going along with everything and going through the motions. I think you know what that feeling is, when you're in a room, you're in a meeting, and it's a little, kind of weird. People are kind of just not really saying very much. They're just going along with everything and nodding and just, yeah, sounds good. Yeah, whatever you want. Or you just don't really disagree because you feel like your voice doesn't matter, or that you're in a position of that's not in authority, or it could be a number of reasons. And that right there is not necessarily you being in alignment with the team. That's just you surviving. And I've been there before, trust me, more times than I can count. And I think it's really important for you to be able to voice your disagreement if it's something that is valid and that you're not just bitching about, or that isn't going to cause other problems. I think that it's important to be able to have a disagreement, even if you don't win, which I don't think is really the goal. But I think that creating that counterpoint is always really important to insert into the conversation, just so at least you've said it and that it's out there. There is this article I read several years ago called The Abilene Paradox, and it's a story about a family who takes a long, miserable 106-mile drive to a cafeteria that no one even likes, and every person assumes that everyone else wants to go, so they don't say anything because they assume everyone wants to go. And they come home sweaty and annoyed and realizing that none of them wanted to take the trip in the first place. So they essentially all were just miserable because they felt like everyone else wanted to go, but they never spoke up saying, you know what, I actually don't really want to go. I don't like it or whatever. And I feel like that's what we do in work and in our teams, as we say yes to decisions, to new policies, to opinions that we don't believe in, that we don't agree with. We spend weeks trying to fix things that we never wanted to fix or do in the first place. And we just do it because other people want to do it, or we assume others want it or feel like it's needed. And if you have a feeling that it's not the right step forward or backwards or to the side or wherever, and you potentially have a better solution, or you just feel like it's not the right time, I think follow that instinct. Trust your instincts and speak up and say what you think is the problem or how you feel about what's happening. Your voice matters in this, and you're a contributor to your team. You don't have to be just a participant in what's happening. So the costs of showing up quietly without really saying much and just kind of going through the motions is that people agree a lot, and because of that, and because they're not feeling comfortable enough to engage, is that in return they start to disengage from the conversation, from what's happening, and over time this creates resentment. And it's kind of very similar to friendships and romantic relationships. Even whenever you have that sliding door moment where you have a choice to either engage or disengage, and the more you disengage, the more distance that you create, and it slowly deteriorates trust. And I think it's the same way with teams, because you want to know that your team has your back. You want to trust your team. You want your you want your team to trust you. And whenever you choose to disengage, that is a moment. And I think that's important to pay attention to. Also, the loudest voice doesn't always mean that's like the best course of action. And I think this group dynamics theme is really important to think about, and who you are in the group relative to other group members. What's your background? Where are you from? What's your experience? What's your gender? Are you an introvert? Are you an extrovert? I think that there's a lot of these dynamics and characteristics that I think are just really important to note and to pay attention to as you're interacting with the group. And sometimes I think if you're not sure, don't talk and just observe and listen and kind of see how people react and how people are, how they're interacting with the group and the conversation. Teams end up executing decisions that don't always have the best conviction behind them, because there's an idea that's proposed, there's no dissent, and so that's the idea that ends up being put forward. It's like, oh, okay, well, no one said anything, so we're going to go with this. It's sort of like the majority rule kind of thing. So avoiding disagreement, it might feel the best way. It might feel nice. It might feel like you're being a team player in the moment, but sometimes it might just cause more delays because in the future something might come up and it's like, okay, well, why didn't we talk about this before? Or you realize that it's not going to work for XYZ. So harmony is not always the best way to see if teams are really healthy. Next thing I want to talk about is the blueprint of a productive disagreement. There are definitely ways to go about this that maybe aren't the most ideal, and you know what I mean. People say things in a very bitchy way, or they say things that are blaming, or the language that they use is not productive. You might have been that person. I have been that person before. You may have seen it where you weren't necessarily involved in that. You might be involved on the other side of it. Disagreement isn't the problem. I'm going to say that again. Disagreement is not the problem. the way that we talk about the disagreement, the way that we, how and what we say and why we say it, I think are all really important factors. So a good disagreement, it doesn't blame people. It doesn't put somebody down. It doesn't try to put you higher or that to prove that you're right. It's okay for people to have a disagreement. That is completely normal. It doesn't mean you have to be disrespectful towards the other person's opinion or viewpoint or idea. So I think that's really important to drive home on this, that even if you have different ideas, different belief systems, different values, that doesn't mean that the other person's idea or opinion is less than, because you want to feel respected whenever you're having conversations and whenever you're presenting an idea. So keep that in mind as we're talking about this. Most blow-ups, when people kind of go to a place that is a little too much, it happens because not because people are disagreeing, the actual disagreement itself, but because they've either let this go on for too long, and that's the resentment I'm sort of referring to from before. And also there's not really a structure for how to have a disagreement. No one knows how to deal with it. No one is willing to sit in the uncomfortableness of that and let it be what it needs to be. And here's 3 pieces to make disagreements productive. The first thing is boundaries. You can't have trust without boundaries, 100%. Be clear about what you're talking about, and not everything needs to be like dragged in. So don't cross-talk about multiple things at the same time, because it starts to get really messy, especially if the thing you're talking about is complex. Talk about one thing at a time, and if you start getting off on another thing, bring it back and refocus on that until you've addressed / solved whatever you're talking about first. I think focusing on that before you start bringing in a bunch of other things, unless it's supportive to what you're talking about and it's actually conducive to getting forward in whatever you're talking about. The next thing is balance. So make intentional space for the people to talk and give them their time to talk. Don't talk over somebody. Don't interrupt them. You don't want to be interrupted. You don't want to be talked over. You want to feel like you have space from whoever you're talking to, your team, to talk about what you need to talk about, to give your point of view. And your point of view is valid, and so is theirs. And if only the extroverts and people who are confident in whatever they're talking about, their idea, get to speak, then you're not really getting the full time that you deserve, just like anyone else does. So I think the balance is really important. And also, I want to also add in the space that you are, not just the talking space, but the physical space, I think is also potentially really important. If it's not in like a meeting setting, if it's maybe impromptu or something like that, I think that's a really important factor too. The next thing is oversight. Your job, I don't think anyone's job is to choose sides on anything necessarily, and especially in the context of working on a show or on a production. In my opinion, and I think most people agree with this who are stage managers, is that we do things that are best for the show. We solve problems, we create paperwork, we create systems so that we can serve the show the best that we can. We can do the best job that we can. And I think sometimes, myself included, we get distracted by the things that I want to happen, the things that I feel like we should be doing. And sometimes it's not always the best course of action. Sometimes it's maybe not, I don't want to qualify it with right or wrong. I think the best course of action probably, maybe it doesn't serve the overall production as a whole. So keeping what you're disagreeing about the work and what you're trying to accomplish, rather than about the personalities in the room or about the people. And this is a very thin line, I think, because we're all humans and we work with humans and that's our job. So I don't want to take the human element out of it, because that's an important piece of it. But I think that for the function and purpose of getting through this disagreement, I think that when you remove that piece of it, it's a lot easier to not blame and to speak to each other with respect and talking about what you need to talk about, especially when you're disagreeing, because you're going to be in a higher emotional state. So once you get the disagreement, some boundaries, and you create balance and you've got some oversight for it, it stops feeling less like a threat and it starts feeling more like you're kind of getting somewhere, and like you're starting to get some clarity on like what the problem is whenever you give your team a chance to actually discuss it in a really productive way. And I think in the moment, it probably will feel very uncomfortable. And especially if you haven't done it before, it's going to be like, oh shit, like it's going to feel a little bit weird, but I think it's really healthy. The next thing I'm talking about is building a disagreement architecture. Don't wait until things are boiling over. That is not good. It's not healthy. Build the space before the heat shows up in the problem, and try to get ahead of it as soon as you can. Most teams only deal with conflict when it erupts. I think this is what a lot of people do just in general. They ignore it or they just deal with it before it becomes this huge problem. And it's like if you had addressed it before, if you had given feedback earlier, it wouldn't become this like resentful thing. Going back to that when you're constantly disengaging, and then it's going to boil over at some point, and then it's way messier. People have emotions involved. They're pissed. They are checked out. They're burnt out. They don't feel like they're valued. There's a whole other list of things that can result in just having a difficult conversation, disagreeing about something as a team, and as a team getting through whatever that is. Leaders who handle the tension well, they're not winging it. They're creating small habits that make the disagreement normal. And normalizing that it's okay to not agree, to have disagreement, to get through those conversations. I think that's a really important part to having a good, strong team, is to have some disagreement. Like it's okay. Not that we have to agree on everything, but knowing that there's a space that you have a voice to disagree and to voice that opinion, whether it changes the course or whether it's just, okay, noted, we understand that, this is a response to that, and you can move through that, and it sort of lets that go, so to speak. And so you've addressed it, and then you can move on from it. You don't have to, hold on to it. Just let it go. So here's 3 tools to make this a bit easier. We want to align dissent. And what I mean by that is to give someone the job of questioning the plan. When dissent is expected, it doesn't feel like betrayal. So having someone on the team, and this can be random, it can be a rotation, where you take a look at the plan from like a devil's advocate type of role, where you are just dissecting and questioning just everything, the general idea, the specific things. And I think this is an important piece for sure. And it can show up in a lot of different ways to be able to do that, because we do often get in a group think kind of mentality where if we're all thinking the same way, or a number of people are thinking the same way, then it can be hard to have that dissent and open up a conversation that could be productive to get us to a better place. Even if the majority of the team does agree, I think it is also important to just have that flip counterpoint to be like, well, are we thinking about this completely? Or are we missing things? Are there blind spots that we're not really considering at this point? It honestly gets harder as the group gets bigger, I think, because 10 people can talk, 25 people start performing. And once the group gets bigger and bigger, it's harder to have those like conversations that are meaningful, and people just talk because they want other people to see them talk and give a good idea, or be the smart person or whatever, then it starts to become a little bit more performative. So I think that having that, if you're managing a large team, I'm not going to talk very much about this because it's not super It's not super relevant to stage management teams. It's more relevant to, performers and things like that, or even crew. So anyways, debrief the disagreement is the next thing. After the decision, after you guys talk about everything, take a breath, maybe take 5, get a coffee, go to the bathroom, whatever, and get some feedback about what that disagreement was. I think that whenever you're in a disagreement, you definitely get into like this heightened place and you're like, oh, I just like need to like get away from this for a second. And I think that's good. It gives you a break, your mental break, an emotional break. It separates you physically from the space that you're in. So when you come back, you feel a little bit different. What helped? What hurt? What wasn't helpful? What did we not talk about? Reflection is so important. It becomes the scaffolding for everything else after it and helps you to communicate better for yourself, to your team, within the team. And I think it's a really important piece is the debrief and feedback. So it's really, really important. When you build a structure around disagreement, you're not inviting drama. You're just creating a place for people to speak their truth and for it to be sacred. Everyone needs to have that safe space to speak their truth and to tell their story, regardless of how that comes and whether it's in agreement or disagreement. So why does this matter at all? Why do we need to disagree? Why should we disagree? Healthy disagreement makes teams braver. It builds trust. And it doesn't divide the teams, actually. I think it makes teams stronger because you learn more about people's perspective, experience, and what they're bringing to the team, what they're thinking and caring about. The values that we say we care about, for me, it's presence, vulnerability, curiosity, and courage. They don't show up when everything's hunky-dory, smooth, going super great. They show up in those tense moments whenever you're in disagreement. You don't like what's happening. You feel like you want to say something else. And it's like that fight or flight moment, when your body is like wanting to do something. And I think that the values and how do you lead in your values and how do you embody the values that you have, that's a really important piece. So paying attention to those, how do you show up in those moments? A team that has disagreed honestly and still stays intact is a stronger team for it. Like I mentioned, it strengthens the team. And a team that disagrees is always going to be stronger than a team that never disagrees on anything. Same thing in personal relationships. I feel like friends that I agree with, I have a less stronger relationship than the friends that I disagree with because you get into conversations that are at a more of a depth. I feel like rather than it just being surface level all the time, you get a chance to go deep on some of the conversations. And it's the same thing with teams. Like when issues and conflicts come up, other things sort of come up that are important to pay attention to. The way that you talk, the way that people show up, Avoiding the tension, it always feels easier because it's not in conflict, but it does create vague decisions and it creates this vagueness that I think is definitely not healthy. And later, it requires a lot more cleanup and tidying and changing and modifying and whatever because there's not really any clear direction. The real conversation and having that disagreement and really being honest about where you are and what you feel and think about it, it saves you a dozen hours probably. And the annoyance and the resentment and the arguments and whatever else, it saves a lot of that. If you just like take all of that shit, if you were to just constantly agree on everything and you just packed it all together, just have the conversation. It's like ripping a Band-Aid off. Rip the fucking Band-Aid off, be done with it and move on, And it's really easy to say that. And in the moment, it's definitely a choice to either engage or disengage in what that conversation is. But I think that if you just have the conversation and you have the disagreement and you talk it out then I think it's ultimately better for the team. So the next time that you're in a room and you want to say something or you disagree with something, say something. Also, try not to be the person that always jumps in with every single thing that someone says. Sometimes just creating space, being the person that listens, that validates, that just observes what's happening, that's okay too. You don't always have to be talking. You don't always have to say something. Not that you don't need to or that you shouldn't, but if you don't feel like your idea is going to contribute or maybe it's going to derail what's already being talked about, maybe jot it down and circle back to a different time in the meeting or another meeting completely. That's really important too. Okay, so here's a recap. Harmony is not the same as health in teams. Productive disagreements need boundaries, balance, and oversight. Build your disagreement architecture before you need it. And disagreement held well deepens trust and sharpens the work. Thank you so much for sticking to the end. If you like this, please give it a like, follow, subscribe, share it with your network, and see you in the next one.